Welcome to the Salish Sea Fellowship Sunday afternoon service, November 17th. Our speaker today is Joseph Bednarik. We hope you enjoy this recording of our service, and we hope to see you in person some Sunday afternoon. Thanks for listening.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Salish Sea Fellowship. We are a religious community with open hearts and open minds. We embrace the traditional principles of Unitarianism and Universalism. My name is Kathleen Croston. I'm the pulpit assistant today. Our speaker is Joseph Bednarik. And Joseph has some books on a table back by the cookies, and we invite you all to take a look. And now I invite us to quiet our minds. We will begin our sacred time together with our chime. We will now light our chalice. In times of light and times of darkness, may this small flame kindle what is good in us and in the world.
So to continue on with the winter themes, I'm bringing forward a poem by a Taoist, American Taoist poet. He believed that he was a reincarnation of a Chinese poet, and I believe him, a man named David Budbill. He lived in Vermont, so he knows a thing or two about winter. And this is a poem that he calls Winter Tonight, Sunset. Tonight at sunset, walking on the snowy road, my shoes crunching on the frozen gravel, first through the woods, then out into the open fields, past a couple of trailers and some pickup trucks, I stop and look at the sky. Suddenly, orange, red, pink, blue, green, purple, yellow, gray, all at once and everywhere. I pause in this moment at the beginning of my old age, and I say a prayer of gratitude for getting to this evening, a prayer for being here, today, now, alive, in this life, in this evening, under this sky. So one of my favorite poems on the planet Earth, it's less than 30 words long, written by a Polish woman who served as a nurse in during the Warsaw Uprising during World War II. She had been captured by the Nazis, and the story goes she was within 30 minutes of being executed. And thankfully, her life was spared, and with that life, she wrote this poem that traveled across languages, across decades, across an ocean, to find listeners here and now. These words: "There is a light in me," by Anna Swear. Whether in daytime or in nighttime, I always carry inside a light. In the middle of noise and turmoil, I carry silence. Always, I carry light and silence. Now, Anna Sweer's poem was a vibrant presence with me when I made my most recent trip to the United Nations, because I believe that within the building of the UN, there is a physical embodiment of that poem. I was in New York City for a business trip, and one day after a working lunch, I was blessed with this long afternoon with no obligations, no meetings, so I decided to take a walk to the UN. Specifically, I wanted to revisit a place called the Meditation Room, a place that I had been years before when my young family made a special trip to New York. And just a quick side note about the preparations for that trip. It was the first time that our family was going to go to New York City together. And my twin daughters were young teenagers, and this was the first time that they were ever going to see and visit the world's Alpha City. They'd heard about New York a lot. They were extremely excited about the experience. They wanted to see and do everything, but we only had 4 days in the city. So to make certain that everyone in the family got to do what they wanted most to do, we devised this plan. We sat down at the kitchen table and we brainstormed a list of all the things that we wanted to do in New York. Broadway show, top of the Empire State Building, Museum of Modern Art, that was me. Eat bagels and lox, walk in Central Park, Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty, etc., etc., etc. So after this big long list was created, we realized that we could not afford the time nor the money to do everything. So every person in the family selected their top 5 or 6 activities in priority order. And each person was assured that they would get to do their number 1 activity. And we cross-referenced all the lists to see how many number 2s and 3s we could fit in. And now just think if your life was like that every effort was made by whatever group you were involved in to ensure that your individual priorities were met. And when you weren't doing something that was important to you, to know that whatever you were doing was somebody else's most important priority, and that you loved them, and that you loved doing what they loved doing. What a fantastic way to practice empathy, to practice patience, to practice understanding, to learn not to be bored when you're doing something you just don't like. It's like, wait a minute, actually mom likes doing this. Let's kind of climb into this. And to learn what treasures may exist in the world that you don't even know about and currently don't care about. Like, for example, I just got back from Western New York visiting my mom and dad, who are elderly. And my mom's just an amazing quilter. And I realized I had never really talked to her about her quilting. And so I actually sat down with her. I asked her, I was there for 2 weeks. I asked her for her to get 2 dozen of her favorite quilts. 1 dozen of her favorite quilts. And I interviewed her about her quilts. And it was amazing just to sit with this person. I'd never, ever, ever had the urgency, I guess, to ask questions about her quilts. And it was incredible. And so I just wish that the world would operate more like that and more like the Charter of the United Nations, that it was boiled down to that elegant little plan. Everyone gets to do their number 1. And in this vast and complicated world, unfortunately, we are not a small family on vacation. So the notion of actually making that happen is quite fanciful. But anyway, on the top of one of my daughter's lists was visit the United Nations. Imagine a 14-year-old visit the United Nations. I was impressed. That activity was nowhere on my list. And so we went as a family to the United Nations, and we got the official tour. We saw the exhibits. We sat in the General Assembly. And then after the tour, I stumbled upon, almost by accident, one of the world's most unheralded treasures, and that is the meditation room. Now, the room itself is relatively small. It contains just a few items, including 10 small wicker benches there's an abstract painting, there is a thin shaft of light beaming down from the ceiling, and an unignorable 7-ton block of iron ore. This massive presence essentially creates its own gravitational field. It is the definition of presence and solidity and, what's the best way to say this? This grand scale stillness. And it turns out that every detail of the meditation room in this, what I consider sacred space, was overseen by the famous UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, who wrote the following about the meditation room, quote, "We all have within us a center of stillness surrounded by silence." Now, what an echo of that Anna Sweer poem. And he continues, "This house," by which he meant the UN, "this house dedicated to work and debate in the service of peace should have one room dedicated to silence in an outward sense and stillness in an inward sense. It has been the aim to create in this small room a place where doors may be open to infinite lands of thought and prayer." This is still Hammarskjöld's words. "People of many faiths will meet here, and for that reason, none of the symbols to which we are accustomed in our meditation should be used. However, there are simple things which speak to us all with the same language. We have sought for such things, and we believe that we have found them in the shaft of light striking the shimmering surface of solid rock. So in the middle of the room, we see a symbol of how daily the light from our skies gives life to the earth on which we stand, a symbol to many of us of how the light of the Spirit gives life to matter. But the stone in the middle of the room has more to tell us. We may see it as an altar, empty, not because there is no God, but because it is an altar to an unknown God, but because it is dedicated to God whom other people, under many names and in many forms, worship. The stone in the middle of the room reminds us also of the firm and permanent in the world of movement and change. The block of iron ore has the weight and solidity of the everlasting. It is a reminder of the cornerstones of endurance and faith on which all human endeavor may be based. The material of the stone leads our thoughts to the necessity for the choice between destruction and construction, between war and peace. Of iron, people have forged swords. Of iron, people have made plowshares. Of iron, they have constructed tanks. But of iron, they have likewise built homes. The block of iron ore is part of the wealth that we have inherited on this earth of ours. How are we to use it? Close quote. Now I love that provocative question. How are we to use it? He continues. The shaft of light strikes the stone in the room of utter simplicity. There are no other symbols. There is nothing to distract our attention or to break in on the stillness within ourselves. When our eyes travel from these symbols to the front wall, they meet a simple pattern, opening up to the room, the harmony, the freedom, the balance of space. And there is an ancient saying, in the sense that a vessel is not in its shell, but in its void. So it is with this room. It is for those who come here to fill the void with what they find in their center of stillness. Close quote. Wow. I long for leaders like that. And I realize that passage was a touch longer than I usually use within messages, but I could not figure a graceful way to shorten it without taking out something essential. Sometimes that's just the way those quotes go. And it's, I love being in those spaces where everything is considered. And those words were written nearly 70 years ago in an era when the nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union were creating worldwide tensions and anxieties. And thank goodness for talented diplomats who can build generous, sacred spaces and call on the family of humanity to consider silence. We don't need to be talking all the time. And stillness. We don't need to be moving all the time. Light and dark, effervescence and solidity, and the, quote, God whom people worship under many names and in many forms, including, I trust, those who believe in no God, and that C in the shaft of light, E equals MC squared, and in the giant block of iron, they see iron-rich blood cells that pump through humanity's and humanists' hearts. So I was so very moved by this place inside the United Nations, in the midst of the world's alpha city, that less than 4 miles from ground zero, where one of the world's greatest tragedies took place, there was a small room dedicated to silence and stillness, with the expressed intention of having the visitors experience the useful void at the center of stillness. Now, the ancient saying that Hammarskjöld refers to is the Chinese classic passage 11 from the Tao Te Ching, and I'll read Red Pine's version, his translation. 30 spokes converge on a hub, but it's the emptiness that makes a wheel work. Pots are fashioned from clay, but it's the hollow that makes a pot work. Windows and doors are carved from a house, but it's the spaces that make a house work. Existence makes a thing useful. Non-existence makes it work. Now, the meditation room for me, it has become one of my sacred sites, and it is the embodiment of Anna Swear's lines, always I carry light and silence. It's that light of a single beam from above, the silence of 7 tons of black iron ore. And I find deep comfort that there is a 7,000-pound block of Swedish iron sitting in a small room in New York City. It has been in that room for nearly 70 years, and it's right there, right now, this moment, with light pooled on its surface. As we were talking earlier in Joys and Sorrows, what can we do? I think I'm going to be thinking a lot about that iron ore and that light. And I needed to get back there, right? So I made a pilgrimage back to the United Nations. I handed over my identification. I got photographed. I removed my belt. I emptied my pockets. I passed through metal detectors to walk to the meditation room and to sit on a small wicker bench. And I faced that block of iron and that shaft of light. I closed my eyes. I took in a really deep breath, and I let Anna Swear's poem come to mind. And I thought about how she felt while she waited for her execution. Now, the lesson of a block of black Swedish iron, mined from the top of the world, and sitting in that exact spot for nearly 70 years, is to sit and to gaze and to listen. And that thin beam of light weighs nothing. The block, it is pure density. So I got up and I walked to that beam of light, and I placed my hand in its path. The shadow of my hand cast atop that iron, light, dark, iron and blood, bone and breath. I am all alone. And frankly, I am surprised that I am alone in a city teeming with 8 million people inside a building dedicated to world peace. I am all alone with a block of black iron and a thin beam of light and an abstract painting. And then I hear the door open and then close. I return to my place on the wicker bench. A man enters the space, throws me a quick glance, sees me, and then recedes into the passageway where I now can't see him. I continue staring at the iron, the light, relishing the silence, but I'm hearing rustlings behind me, and then these soft murmurings of a voice. This holy place of stillness and silence is being desecrated, I think. And then I realize this man is praying. I sit and stare in my silence while a Muslim man kneels and whispers prayers to his God. He's practicing his religion, respectfully trying not to encroach on my prayers. Silence. He faces toward Mecca. I face toward iron and light. And while I am not proud of this, I am annoyed. This man is breaking my silence. The silence designed by Hammarskjöld with prayers to a specific God inside a room designed for universal silence and universal stillness. And mindfully, I become annoyed with myself because I'm annoyed. And then I recall Hammarskjöld's question, how are we to use it? How are we to use it? The it being 7 tons of black ore. So I sit and I stare at the how do we use it iron, the soft prayers behind me, prayers as weightless as the light splashing on that iron. And then 3 more men enter. They enter the larger room where I am sitting. They take off their shoes. From their briefcases, they remove small prayer rugs and unfurl them. And I decide to leave, more to avoid my annoyance than to honor their desire to pray in peace. So I evacuate the space, allow these devout Muslims their space to pray within the confines of the United Nations. And as I stand outside the meditation room, waiting for my turn to re-enter, I reread Hammarskjöld's words, quote, "It has been the aim to create in this small room a place where the doors may be open to the infinite lands of thought and prayer." The infinite lands of thought and prayer. They are infinite. They are vast. These suited bureaucrats, they meet the earth on bended knee to pray their prayers, practice their religion. Who am I to expect strict adherence to my version of silence and my improvisational pilgrimage and worship at the universal altar of iron and light? They found a quiet place in the Alpha City to practice their religion and honor their God. And when they left, I re-entered. The altar of iron, the light, they welcomed me back. And they told me with exquisite stillness, always I carry light and silence. Amen.